All right, welcome in to another day of your daily Devo. This is Pastor Rick here, and I'm glad you're here. It's going to be a good day. Taking a look at chapter 9 of the book of Hosea, and I think there's like 13 chapters in this book, so got another today plus another like 4 days in the book. I think we'll be able to keep to the kind of one chapter a day kind of pace, so that should be good. And today's little title here is The Coming Exile. So I don't know about you, but it doesn't sound super like encouraging. However, we know it's important for us to take a look at it because the Word of God tells us that all these things written in the Old Testament were written for our example so that we can learn lessons from other people's payments of, rebellion or stupidity or ignorance or whatever it was that caused them to walk into kind of the judgment or the punishment that they experienced. Try to understand, like, what did you do? How did you get there? And how maybe I can avoid that same type of dynamic in my own life. Kind of like me as a parent, my desire is to be able to take lessons that I've learned the hard way, paying those painful prices for those lessons, and being able to pass them on to my kids in such a way that they can function according to those new principles of wisdom without having to pay the price to get it. That's kind of the hope. And I think that even really, really, really great parents, you're able to pass some of it along. But there are just some lessons where, and I think it varies from kid to kid or whatever, that they have to learn on their own. Like, it doesn't matter what you told them. They're going to do the thing that they want to do. And they're probably going to pay the price for it. They're probably going to have to learn a painful lesson about it. But any lessons that we can teach would just be great. So with that in mind, let's jump into verse 1. Israel, do not rejoice jubilantly as the nations do, for you have acted promiscuously, leaving your God. For you love the wages of a prostitute on every grain threshing. You love the wages of a prostitute on every grain threshing floor. Threshing floor and wine vat will not sustain them, and the new wine will fail them. So just talking about the upcoming challenges they're going to face. And I was reading actually a commentary. John Corson writes a pretty great commentary. It's actually written on the whole Bible. And so he actually pointed out five signs that you've kind of walked away from God. And the first indicator, he says, is kind of pointed out here, is a death of or a loss of joy. So, as he starts out here, do not rejoice jubilantly as the nations do, because these things aren't going to sustain you, and they're going to fail you. And it's going to really begin to suck the life, the joy, just out of life, because as those things begin to fail, you start to experience some real challenges, and it starts to really weigh on your ability to put on a happy face, if you will. And so verse 3 here, they will not stay in the land of the Lord. Instead, Ephraim will return to Egypt, and they will eat unclean food in Assyria. And so his second point actually was a return to bondage. That things that you'd overcome previously in the past maybe kind of rear their ugly heads again, and you get sucked into some sinful patterns of behavior, some bad habits, some just stuff like that. As you can see here, they won't stay in the land of the Lord. They won't continue to walk in the land of freedom, the land flowing with milk and honey. Instead, they're going to return to Egypt, where they were once slaves, and they're going to eat the unclean food in Assyria, living amongst like the people at that time were, practically barbarians in the sense of just being so violent and so brutal, like such a brutal people. So let's go. So again, a death of or a loss of joy, and then a return to bondage, a return to sinful patterns of behavior that you had once walked in freedom from, because of a turning of your heart away from the Lord. Because we know that God is omnipresent, so he's always around, right? He's inescapable, like we read about in Psalms as we were going through our Psalms series, that God's everywhere. I can go down to the depths of hell and yet you are there. And so, but yet there's this active like covering of grace and favor over your life as God is watching you and with you. Like, when he says, like he'll always be with you, he's always there, right? He's always present. But then there's this active blessing and grace and favor that comes upon your life when you're serving God and you're walking in obedience. There's just this favor that comes on that situation because there's reward for obedience. It's just the way it is. It's just one of the laws of the universe God has put into place, is that when you obey, it commands a blessing. So when you disobey, kind of the opposite ends up being true, is you start putting yourself in a place where correction needs to come. And so you're going to find yourself in bondage to things that you once were free from. Your joy is going to be kind of dead. And then the next one is a loss of discernment. And it's kind of explained in about verses 4-7. So they will not pour out their wine offerings to the Lord, and their sacrifices will not please him. Their food will be like the bread of mourners. All who eat it become defiled. For their bread will be for their appetites alone. It will not enter the house of the Lord. What will you do on a festival day, on the day of the Lord's feast? For even if they flee from devastation, Egypt will gather them, and Memphis will bury them. Thistles will take possession over their precious silver. Thorns will invade their tents. The days of punishment have come. The days of retribution have come. Let Israel recognize it. And here they say, the prophet is a fool, and the inspired man is insane. And so here the man of God was coming to declare the truth to them, and they were like, nah, you're a fool. And so the things that were true, they were calling untrue. The things that were false, they were treating as true. Excuse me, because of a complete and total loss of discernment. Like they just stopped being able to tell what was good and what was bad. And that is one of the huge traps of sin, of rebellion against God, is that we begin to trade in the truth for a lie, because God is good, God is love, God is truth. So anything that is not, anything that is opposed to God is falsehood, is lies. And when we choose to turn our back on the source of all truth, then we begin to become more dim in our understanding and our discernment, our ability to tell the difference. And that is the slippery slope, if you will, of sin, is because, and that's why you got to stay as far away from it as you can. Like, it's not to be toyed with. Like, God is incredibly patient, incredibly merciful, incredibly gracious. It's just true. I mean, that's kind of the story of this whole book, as we go back to reminding ourselves where this started, where he tells Hosea, like, go and marry the prostitute. And by the way, after you marry her, she's going to continue to be unfaithful. And yet I want you to go and get her. He doesn't just say wait for her to return, but he is like, no, go get her. Like we said, well, like we saw chapter 3 where he buys her back. He literally goes and pays a price to bring her back, painting quite the picture for what God has done for us. But as you step into sin, you start to compromise your ability to see things accurately. And then where it started out, where you were making kind of a clear, definitive, informed decision, it stops being that way the further it goes, because your ability to tell the difference between them just goes down and down and down. And so it's super important that we guard ourselves against sin and against unrighteousness, because it just skews our brain's ability to tell the difference. Here's one that I thought was really interesting is, we're going to keep on reading and then I'll get to that point number 4 that he brought up. So death or loss of joy, return to bondage, loss of discernment. And then we'll hit some more here in just a second. Because of the magnitude of your iniquity and hostility, Ephraim's watchman is my God, yet the prophet encounters a bird trap on all his pathways. Hostility is in the house of his God. So all the people are being hostile towards him. They've deeply corrupted themselves, as in the days of Gibeah. He will remember their iniquity and he will punish their sins. So just like, hey, don't be silly. God is not mocked. You reap what you sow. So don't mistake the patience of God for the approval of God. Don't mistake the patience of God for the approval of God. So because God's being patient with you, he's being merciful towards you, don't confuse that with thinking that he's cool with where you're at and what you're doing. Because that's the trap that Israel certainly fell into. And I know I have fallen into plenty of times in my life, is you start convincing yourself, no, I'm good. Like, man, everything's still good. Or the other trap is that you start giving credit for the great things in your life that definitely come from God. You start giving credit for those things to yourself or just to natural whatever. And so when God removes that grace and that blessing from your life, even though it hurts and it's rough, and it's like the most loving thing he can do is to help you understand where all of this grace and favor and covering comes from, that it comes from him. But sometimes the lag, it's like this lagging indicator because of God's patience and love and grace and mercy. Sometimes the harshness of life is a lagging indicator. Like we may be months or a year or whatever into this bad behavior before stuff kind of really starts to come up and to be exposed. So do not confuse God's patience for his approval. And then verse 10 here, I discovered Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your ancestors like the first fruits of the fig tree in its first season. But they went to Baal Peor, consecrated themselves to shame, and became abhorrent like the thing they loved. Again, that's like idol worship, to boot, right? You become like the thing that you're worshiping. So if we go over to Numbers 25, where the story that they're referring to in Baal Peor comes from, while Israel was staying in the acacia grove, the people began to prostitute themselves with the women of Moab. The women invited them to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed in worship to their gods. So Israel aligned itself with Baal of Peor. So that's just really quick, the summary of what they did. They aligned themselves with Baal of Peor. So, but they went, to Baal of Peor, consecrated themselves to shame, and became abhorrent like the thing they loved. Ephraim's glory will fly away like a bird. This is like the result of that. No birth, no pregnancy, no conception. So the fourth sign that you've walked away from God, and this is could be individually, could be kind of group oriented, is a falling birth rate. And it struck me as interesting, honestly, just because I was just reading an article the other day about the super low birth rate in the United States. And the commentary, that I'm reading was written years ago, 30 years ago. And so, how interestingly prophetic. some of this stuff is. I mean, it's a prophetic book, right? But the way that it applies to us today is so incredible. It's so intriguing. It's like, wow, God, like this pattern is happening yet again. And I think sometimes today the church, is quick to point to the evil in the world around us, but really the attention needs to be on the house of God, on the church today, to say like, have we lost our joy? Have we returned to bondage? Have we returned to things that have kept us captive before? Have we lost our discernment? And what's our birth rate look like from a physical, natural standpoint, but also from a spiritual standpoint? Are we having spiritual kids? Are we seeing people come to faith in Christ? And then the last one is, it's in verse 17, so we'll take a second to get there. But so even if they raise children, I will bereave them of each one. Yes, woe to them when I depart from them. Woe to them when I depart from them. And that's kind of God saying like, hey, apparently you don't even fully realize the blessing that I bring when I'm in your midst. So woe to you. When I depart from you, you're going to begin to understand. I've seen Ephraim like Tyre planted in a meadow. So Ephraim will bring out his children to the executioner. And this is, legitimately what happened is they began to sacrifice their kids to other gods. And you see some of that same kind of stuff today where people either just through neglect or through, just exposing their kids to different things, kind of giving their kids over to the gods of this age. So Ephraim will bring out his children to the executioner. Give them, Lord, what should you give? Give them a womb that miscarries and breasts that are dry. All their evil appears at Gilgal. So there I began to hate them. I will drive them from my house because of their evil, wicked actions. I will no longer love them as their leaders are rebellious. Ephraim is struck down. Their roots are withered. They cannot bear fruit. Even if they bear children, I will kill the precious offspring of their wombs. My God will reject them because they have not listened to him. They will become wandering among the nations. So this isolation thing, that's the last indicator. Isolation because they've walked away. They have not listened. They rejected. Like, they aligned themselves with Baal of Peor. So, again, this is all written for our example, for us to learn from. And just ask yourself, like, have I gotten to a place where I take for granted the goodness and the blessing of God that's in my life to where I don't even give him credit for it anymore? And one of the greatest ways that we can avoid walking away from God is by having a gratefulness journal kind of thing where we take time each and every day to reappreciate what God has done for us, what he has blessed us with, what he has poured into our lives. And so I encourage you today, if you have kind of turned your back and wandered away, come on back, because he's there to love you and restore you, because that's the beautiful story of Hosea. There are some brutal points in here, but the overriding message is God's redeeming love for his people, that he's continuing to pursue his people even when they have been nothing but unfaithful. So return. And if you haven't wandered away, but maybe you've just kind of grown a little bit like complacent, and you've begun to be a little bit taking all the things that God's blessed your life with for granted, or you've started to ascribe those things to other causes and other sources. And I just challenge you in kind of this gratefulness journal kind of thing, that you begin to reascribe those things to God, to give God the honor and the glory and the praise that is genuinely due to his name. So that, I think, will safeguard our hearts against walking away from him when we continually, daily remind ourselves of his goodness and his faithfulness, so that we are not distracted by the lies of the enemy that try to come in to pick us off. Because if we are content in him, we won't look to the Baal of Peor to to meet our needs. We will look to God and we will stay faithful to him, which will bless him and will be, tremendous blessing in our lives, obviously, right? So, because being faithful and serving God with your whole heart is a place of beautiful peace, the peace of God, the blessing of God, and that's where we want to be. So I hope you are strengthened today. I hope you are encouraged, and I hope you are freshly reminded of God's goodness and faithfulness today. With that, God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.